Thank you so much for being here. My name is Rachel Greiner. I'm a second-year PhD student at UNC Chapel Hill. Today I'll be presenting Krisko recipes for der idisher baleboste, a short Yiddish and cooking experiment. Um, so many thanks to give to the conference organizers, to the other panelists, to the commenter, and then also some folks who helped me specifically with this project, to say Molgard and Laura Reckelman for being helping me when I get into cooking trouble, Sasha Bernstein for supporting with some Yiddish translation questions, and then the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies for funding some of this research. Okay, cool. So today we're going to be talking about the Krisko cookbook, and I have a picture of the cover of the cookbook in the corner and then a final product. Okay, cool. So we have an overview. We're going to talk about what is Krisko, the historical context of this cookbook, 3 recipes I tried from the cookbook, and then some like ongoing questions. Yeah, I'm really excited that this conference is called Bad Yiddish because I can't speak Yiddish very well and I'm very new to cooking. So I think so just a disclaimer of like, this is the beginning of a process. The other disclaimer I would like to give is that a lot of us like look at food on social media and in cookbooks, and I will be showing you some pictures of some very ugly food. I am sorry in advance. Okay. So what is Krisko? So I have a little picture of Krisko, a little spoonful of Krisko that I took in the upper left, so you can see that. And Krisko's is a cooking oil. So oil is useful because it has a higher smoke point in cooking, and it also adds flavor. Oil repels water, so then if you think about and just different cooking processes, it's very useful to have to dry out food and to cook it. Krisko originally, this is not true anymore, but originally it was hydrogenated cottonseed oil, which was very useful because it was a fat that stayed solid at room temperature. It was cheap and it lasted a long time. And then today you would see it in pie crust, baking, and then also to make recipes parve. So those are some general uses. Today it is not made out of cottonseed oil anymore. It's made from soybean oil, palm oil, and citric acid. And then I just took a picture of my computer's acting up. I took a picture of like what Krisko looks like in the grocery store. You can see all these different options and sizes and brand options as well. Okay, so we have some like general historic context. So if you think about these big waves of immigration of Eastern European Jews to the United States, 1820 to 1924-ish, these huge waves of immigration, there are people coming in through Ellis Island, through Galveston, Texas, through Canada, and they're coming to New York City, but they're coming to other places. And some of those places are also like the Midwest area, which is kind of where this cookbook comes out of. And during that time, you have the German-American Jews who've been there for a long time, and they see these Jews immigrating, and they would like them to be more American. They want them to be less the traditions that they have and sort of adopt this new Americanness for a variety of reasons. So we have these settlement houses. And in these settlement houses, there's a range of classes. There's cooking classes, there's English classes, there's classes around homemaking. And there's a big push again to influence these immigrant groups to be more American, more like kind of white middle class. And so you get these English classes, but you also get classes around like food that seems like more like white American, so maybe a little bit less flavorful. And these other adjustments. There's also German classes because some of the there's a push to get Eastern European Jews to stop speaking Yiddish and to accept more German or English. So there's these like push to make people more American. There's also a lot of classes around manners and that sort of thing. So that's like one big thing that's happening. Another big thing that's happening is this industrial foodways push that's kind of ongoing. It starts before this, it goes on after, but there's just a slice of what's kind of happening in that moment. So 1901, Upton Sinclair publishes The Jungle, which really scares the American public about what is in our food and like do we really know how the food's being made, and these industrial foodways, should we trust them? And then we have and there's reason for that because some of the food we don't know how it's being made, and also there's not a lot of laws around, are you being sold what you think you're being sold? So there's these lard cottonseed oil combinations that are being sold as lard. And then there's also these combinations that are being sold that are cheaper. So you get these products, which, what are they really? And so that's sort of one push, but then at the same time, there's a push to make industrialized food seem more, what's the word? Yeah, to seem more hygienic and more clean. And you see this kind of happening at the same moment. There's a rise in domestic sciences, like researching food and food built in a lab. And those things kind of happen together at this moment when Krisko breaks into the markets. There's also a push to get Jews specifically to trust these industrial processes and trust these industrial processes with kosher laws. So historically, kosher, like keeping kosher, was something that you sort of know where the food product comes from, you have a sense of where it's from and how it will be used, or where it came from, so you know it's kosher. But then in these industrial processes, you can't see how it's being created and you don't really know who it is. And so you have to get it certified. And so the process of getting Jews who are keeping kosher to trust kosher laws is kind of ongoing, and it's something that Krisko is really interested in. They hire a rabbi to certify that it's kosher, and so there's a push to really trust industrial foodways with sanitation and with kosher law. So it's industrial foodways. The third piece is this kind of tension around preserving traditions. So originally I was talking about immigration and settlement. The settlement houses pushing immigrant Jews to sort of leave their foodways behind and adopt this new foodway. But then there's sort of this other push of concern around maintaining those cultural foodways. So you really see this in this, like, after 1924, especially when the immigration laws become more restrictive and you have these generational differences between the older generation that immigrated to the US and younger generation that's here and wanting to transfer or not transfer those traditions. And so you see that in cookbooks as well. I'm trying to turn the page by clicking, but I need to press button. Okay, so that within that context, we see Krisko. So this cookbook is published in 1933 in Cincinnati, Ohio, by Procter & Gamble. And as we mentioned this before, but just to reiterate, cotton seeds were considered a waste product. And the company originally got this patent hydrogenation to make soap. And then they realized this product was edible and they could sell it. And so they really wanted to shift to doing that. The recipes, they solicit recipes, and also they use a test kitchen to sort of develop these recipes. An important thing to think about is Krisko at that time was not a one-to-one replacement for schmaltz or butter. So you need this cookbook to tell you how to cook with Krisko. And you can see from this picture, there's like the front side is in English and the back side is in Yiddish, so you can read it either way, depending on the language you read. Okay. Turn page this way. All right. So just some slices of inside the cookbook. So some of the things I noticed just from a little bit of reading was a Germanic Yiddish spelling, which I'll point out an example of later, but just to know that that is happening. And then there's sort of these English Yiddish words. And so you see words like, instead of like different word, the Yiddish word for cookie or cakes, you get like this English word transliterated. So you get cakes written out in like a Yiddish script. And then some other things that I just wanted to point out, there's a lot of information about measurements and how to use Krisko. There's sections on, how to measure it and what examples of why you would need to use it. And then it's very small, but I just pulled a little section, Krisko recipes for the Jewish housewife. And if you look down, I underlined some of the reasons that the Krisko cookbook thinks that Krisko is the best thing ever. They say that butter has too strong of a flavor, which I thought was kind of funny. And then it's moderate in price, which is accurate. And then they're really emphasizing pure vegetable, like this is really sanitary, and Jewish dietary laws. So they're really trying to connect these things together. Yeah, so that's one part. And then the other part of inside the cookbook I want to talk about, recipes in Yiddish and English. So you can see from this on the right picture, I just took a page from the cookbook, and you can see there's the English recipe, the Yiddish recipe. Actually, that's out of order. That's the Yiddish recipe first, then the English recipe. And you can see that they're sort of side by side. And the cookbook says that they're doing this because, quote, this is to enable two people, as for example, a Yiddish reading mother and an English reading daughter to work together. I don't know if this is actually how this was used or not, but it's a big part of their marketing. And then I just listed some of some other recipes that I thought were sort of interesting. There's farfalle with mango, the broiled salmon, and it assumes that the salmon has bones in it, and it assumes that you know how to debone them. It just says debone with salmon. There's pierogies, gefilte Hälsel, so it's stuffed chicken neck, Bietkugelach. There's the chicken Southern style, some of the recipes. The Hamantaschen calls for poppy seeds, and it says to strain the poppy seeds, which is interesting, and I don't know why it says that. I'm curious about. Yeah, so you can sort of see how this is being used, and I think this sort of taps into this anxiety around transmission of culture, and Krisko sort of promoting the solution of, yeah, like you want to transmit this, like you want to continue your culture and you want to transmit these recipes, and Krisko will help you do it. So that's sort of the emphasis there. Okay, so that's some pieces of the cookbook. Now I'm going to show you 3 of the recipes that I tried out. Let's see if I can turn the page. Okay, cool. So the first recipe was challah. And this was the first one I tried, and I really didn't know what I was doing yet. So I ran into a couple problems. The first one was, if you look at the recipe, it says to add the Krisko into hot water. And so I did that, and you can see in the bottom left corner, I took a picture and I was like, this doesn't look right. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, but this is not right. And I showed this picture to some folks, and they said, you were supposed to boil that so that the Krisko could sort of combine into the water better, but I didn't know because it just said hot. And then I looked up the Yiddish word for like hot water in the recipe, because I was like, well, maybe that will say like boiling water just says hot water. They just assume that you know, I think. There were some other things that I wanted to point out. In the top, I just pulled a little section of the Yiddish, but it says Shabbostika Halle, or Shabbostika Halle, Halle. And I was really confused by that because I thought it said Shabbostige. But that, from what I understand, is a reflection of like a Germanic spelling. And so there's this push for Germanic spelling of the Yiddish words. Some other things I ran into, this recipe says that the dough is supposed to rise for 2 hours. You can see this picture in the annotation I put on the picture. It's the second image on the left, where the dough is just exploding out. 2 hours was too long. I think that yeast maybe at that point was different. And there was no information about, like a contemporary recipe would say, you need to, this is how you can look at it and know when it's done, but there was no information. So I just thought 2 hours was too long. A similar issue with the dough, the recipe said to knead it for 20 minutes. That was also too long. And so the dough was very dry, and it sort of fell apart in the oven. But you can see it kind of expands. And then the bottom, I have a piece of the challah and I opened it up so you can see the texture. Ultimately, the texture is pretty good. I did find it to be a little bit bland. I think because Krisko doesn't have like a strong taste, and so there was no like butter taste. But I found like the recipe is a little confusing, but for the most part, it's pretty good. I've been eating it with like a little bit of butter on top, and I'm happy with it. That's the first one. The second one is blintzes. So I was really curious to make a parve blintz. So you can see, so there was 2 recipes I tried. If you are looking in the cookbook and you want to follow along that way, on page 16, I have the recipe for the blintz that I made, but I just wanted to really talk about a little bit of that and then a little bit about the rest of this parve filling. Yeah, so I ran into some of the other some of the same issues around just the description of how to make the blintz wrappers. They kind of give a range of how much water to add, and so I was trying to kind of make a judgment call, and I had to adjust. Let's see what else do I want to say. Yeah, okay. So then the mock cheese filling. This was really a journey. So if you look, it says melt Krisko in pan over hot water and stir in other ingredients. So at this point, I was like, okay, so when they say hot water, it means boiling. So I was like, I know what to do. I did not know what to do. What this means, so I tried boiling the Crisco in water and it kept coming out really watery. So you can see the third image from the left, the center image that looks really watery. I'm like, what is going on? And I ask some people and they say, no, what this means is a double broiler. You boil the water underneath, cook the Crisco on top. So then the next image, you can see I'm doing that. And so then it was like melt the Crisco in egg whites, salt, sugar, and lemon juice, and you sort of mix it until it has cottage cheese texture. And I don't understand why, but it was very good. It definitely, I fed it to a taste tester. We both agreed this was amazing. And we both were like, it really has this like cottage cheese texture. And I think a blind taste test, you would probably know that there was something a little bit different, but you wouldn't really be able to put your finger on it. The other filling that I tried was kind of the classic one that the recipe or that the cookbook described, with the ricotta filling. And it was just salt and pepper, and it was okay. I think I'm wondering if the cheese maybe that wasn't quite the right cheese. It was possible, but we both me and the other taste tester agreed that the mock cheese filling was the best, which was surprising and kind of fun. So the final recipe I tried was Pumicebrot, which I think is very similar to Mandelbrot. I haven't been able to figure out if there is a strong difference, but there may be. This one was really the best one. There's a couple reasons for that. I think partially at this point I was sort of used to this recipe, so I was kind of or this cookbook, so I had a better sense of maybe some of the challenges. And also I think it sort of reflects what Crisco people still use Crisco for today, which is more for baking. It was good for that. Yeah, so I did do a little bit of cheating, however, because I'd never made Pumicebrot before, and I was a little worried that that I didn't quite trust the recipe. So I was looking at that and I was looking at the Serious Eats recipe at the same time. And unlike the challah recipe, which called for really long cooking time and really long rising time, the Pumicebrot recipe called for, I think, pretty reasonable cooking and heat temperatures that more or less reflected what it needed. I did have a little bit of trouble with the center image. You can't really see it because I sort of put an annotation over it, but a big part of Pumicebrot is you cook it once in the oven and then you take it out and you cut it into little sections and then you put it back in the oven to make it more crunchy. And the recipe seemed to call for putting it in like a tin, as opposed to like a sheet pan, and I found that didn't really cook all the way. The Serious Eats recipe said to make like logs so you could cut them halfway or before you put them back in. I think I would do that again. I'm curious if this recipe meant for that and I just didn't understand it, or if there's something going on there. So that was a little bit of a sticking point, but these turned out really well. And then you can see in the bottom, I have a little piece on a plate, and that's pretty good. Yeah, so those were the three recipes. How am I doing on time? Should I go?
We are at 19 minutes.
Okay.
You have a minute and 10 seconds.
Okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, recipes definitely reflected a change of taste and flavors. Yeah, and just that kind of a theme of it was very it was definitely usable. There were definitely things I was kind of surprised at how much I liked using Crisco. But I also really was surprised at how difficult it was to follow some of these recipes. But I enjoyed doing that. Some ongoing questions. Because I'm sort of learning how to do food research and historic research, these are sort of some things I identified as like maybe I do differently next time, or I have more questions about on the cooking side. Locating and cooking recipes. There are some recipes from this cookbook that sort of become heritage recipes that you see elsewhere. I think in the future, I would like to figure out what those are and cook those and think about that more. It's like, what were the successful recipes that survived? And then I'd also like to compare these recipes from this cookbook to other like cookbooks that were of that same era and see like what is different, what's the same. I think also in the future, when I'm doing historic food research like this, I might want to do more recipes that I'm a little bit more familiar with. So then when I'm going back and looking at these, I sort of have a sense of how the recipe works and maybe what the instructions mean, or just thinking a little bit more about like how to prepare for doing research like this. And then on the historic research question side, I was really interested in, there's so much of the literature talks about manners, and that being a big part of cookbooks and communicating food and home care, and how that's connected to like behavior around race. And I'm just curious about more of that. Like it gets sort of mentioned and I just want to know more about it. There's something going on with like cotton and like Ashkenazi immigration of like the sweatshops and then eating. So there's something about cotton that is really interesting to me. There's a little bit about flavor and what the settlement houses were interested in around flavor. I'd love to know more about what happens before or after those processes. And then some of the cookbooks of this era are intentionally designed um, for people who have like a home with many servants, and some are not. And so I'm curious about how this cookbook was used or not. Just generally more about the lives of people who use this cookbook and what they thought about it. Those are some general questions. And then, so for conclusion, the other thing that sort of came up a little bit in the literature was this discussion of, health, like health and ideal taste and flavor. And a lot of the people I read were talking about this like return to schmaltz. It's more flavorful, and some people say more healthier. So these different things around that. And then these trends around Jewish marketing and trust that sort of come out throughout this text. Yeah, so you can see this sort of arc of immigration and different foods and the foodways that are being impacted.